Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents City of Quartz, Excavating the Future in Los Angeles, by Mike Davis, narrated by Tim Campbell. Preface. Authors are strange parents. Some never wean their offspring, preferring to keep them on their knee, forever close at hand. Others, like myself, punctually kick their progeny out the door with orders never to call home. Apart from occasionally consulting a footnote or reference, I have not looked at City of Quartz since I sent the manuscript, the last relic of Stone Age composition on an IBM typewriter, to my publisher in London in 1990. Recently I skimmed through the bulk of this rather strange book, with its cryptic title. I was particularly nervous about re-encountering a sprawling chapter called Homegrown Revolutions. This huge expanse of crabgrass, a discussion on homeowners' movements and the politics of NIMBYism, took centuries to research. It required reading late at night on microform at the library of York University in Toronto, where I was teaching political economy at the time, the various local editions of the LA Times for a 30-year period. As a result of these obscure labors, I became so attached to every sacred morsel of fact about picket fences and dog doo-doos that I failed to edit the chapter down to a reasonable length. I soon came to fear that I had made a suicidal mistake. No one, I told myself, will ever read this. Yet some people obviously have, even a few who weren't coerced into doing so by their tyrannical Marxist professors. In a meditation on the capriciousness of publishing and reputation, the philosopher Ernst Bloch once asked, "Must books have fates?" The answer, of course, is yes, but not the ones chosen by their authors. The fate of City of Quartz was largely determined by events that followed its publication: the explosive notoriety of LA-based gangster rap, the Rodney King atrocity, and, finally, the apocalyptic uprising that followed the acquittal of his assailants. But the smell of smoke was already, so to speak, in the air by 1988, when I began writing the essays that constitute City of Quartz, and which spilled over into several other edited volumes. Although the owners of a certain graying newspaper on Spring Street may have missed the obvious omens, every 11-year-old in the city knew that an explosion of some kind was coming. In a city tragically full of armed and angry teenagers, LAPD Chief Daryl Gates's Operation Hammer, with its Vietnam-like neighborhood sweeps and indiscriminate nightly harassment, was universally viewed as a deliberate provocation to riot. Indeed, this was the interpretation of the two rookie officers who arrested me after the LAPD's notorious attack on a peaceful Justice for Janitors demonstration in Century City in June 1990. I was, in every sense, a captive audience, cuffed in the back seat of their patrol car, as they launched into a hallucinatory rant about a coming Armageddon, LAPD versus Uzi-armed Crips and Bloods, on the streets of South Central. So, if there were premonitions of 1992 in City of Quartz, they simply reflected anxieties visible on every graffiti-covered wall, or, for that matter, every lawn sprouting a little armed response sign. City of Quartz, to use one of those Parisian terms that I usually try to run over with my pickup truck, is the biography of a conjoncture, one of those moments ripe with paradox and non-linearity, when previously separate currents of history suddenly converge with profoundly unpredictable results. City of Quartz, in a nutshell, is about the contradictory impact of economic globalization upon different segments of Los Angeles society. In 1990, Los Angeles had been governed for almost a generation by a nationally unique coalition of downtown business interests, West Side entertainment industry Democrats, and South Side black voters. After the helter-skelter of the 1960s, when the reactionary populism of rogue Mayor Sam Yorty had come perilously close to wrecking the city, the administration of Mayor Tom Bradley, elected in 1973, represented the first sustained experiment in government by elite consensus. The long conflict between West Side and downtown elites ended in a historic compromise that included West Side support for accelerated downtown redevelopment, and a downtown, especially Chandler Dynasty, support for a largely democratic city hall. West Side downtown cooperation under the honest brokerage of Tom Bradley made possible the most ambitious expansion of municipal infrastructure since William Mulholland built the original aqueduct. Indeed, the greatest single achievement of the Bradley era was the immense program of new investment in ports and airports that allowed LA to become a dominating hub of Pacific Rim commerce, and thus to survive the eventual post-Cold War downsizing of its aerospace economy. Bradley, moreover, was able to accomplish these Robert Moses-like feats despite a hostile environment of tax revolts, government downsizing, and Reaganomics. His administration hewed to the conservative principle, pioneered by Mulholland and his fellow progressives in the Department of Water and Power, that utilities should be self-financing and fiscally inviolable. In other words, any notional profits from the operation of the port, or LAX, must be reinvested in situ. Exploiting tax increment financing, City Hall ratified the same principle for downtown. Fiscal windfalls from the appreciation of publicly subsidized real estate were plowed right back into further redevelopment. These fiscal closed circuits sustained high levels of public investment in container docks, terminal buildings, and downtown bank skyscrapers, that in turn kept happy a huge constituency of pro-globalization interests, including airlines, stevedoring companies, railroads, aerospace exporters, hotels, construction unions, downtown landowners, the Los Angeles Times, Japanese banks, West Side movie studios, big law firms, and the politicians dependent upon the largesse of all of those. But the city was subsidizing globalization without laying any claim on behalf of groups excluded from the direct benefits of international commerce. There was no mechanism to redistribute any share of additional city revenues to purposes other than infrastructure or downtown renewal. There was no linkage, in other words, between corporate-oriented public investment and the social needs that desperately fought for attention in the rest of the city budget. Moreover, the dynamic leadership concentrated on improving the harbor, LAX, and downtown, and later organizing the Bradley Festschriften of the 1984 Olympics, seemed directly subtracted from attention paid to the city's neighborhoods and their subsistence needs. It is astonishing, in retrospect, how little heed City Hall paid to plant closure and redlining in the south-central neighborhoods that were Tom Bradley's original political base, or how little effort was made to redress the generation-long disenfranchisement of the East Side on the city council and the exclusion of Chicanos from significant leadership roles in the ruling coalition. Likewise, it is difficult to explain why the city council failed, despite innumerable warnings and protests, to downzone a city plan that was everywhere destabilizing residential quality of life with massive and irrational densities of permissible new development. Along Ventura Boulevard, skyscrapers were literally sprouting from the front yards of single-family homes. By the time I sat down to write City of Quartz, on the eve of Southern California's greatest post-war recession, Bradley's growth coalition was still intact. Even triumphant, but it was fast losing control of its social landscape. From Porter Ranch to Watts, LA's neighborhoods were ablaze with angry grievances, and suburban sans-culottes were threatening to overthrow the city's ancien regime. In the valley, a so-called slow growth movement had suddenly coalesced out of the molecular agitation of hundreds of local homeowners associations. Although many of the movement's concerns about declining environmental quality, traffic, and density were entirely legitimate, slow growth also had ugly racial and ethnic overtones of an Anglo-gerontocracy selfishly defending its privileges against the job and housing needs of young Latino and Asian populations. Indeed, many of the key leaders of the homeowners' revolt had originally won their stripes in opposition to school integration in the early 1970s, and they would continue in the 1990s to rail at new immigrants and unite with business interests to unsuccessfully promote the secession of the valley. Meanwhile, in the neglected flatlands of mid-city and south-central Los Angeles, the invisible hand was wielding an Uzi as crack cocaine sales, the local form of economic globalization, gave a terrible new economic impetus to gang warfare. The slaughter in the streets, 3 gang killings a day by 1990, also emboldened the LAPD to aggressively expand its power. By 1988, Angelenos nervously wondered who really ran their city, Mayor Bradley or the megalomaniac chief of police, Daryl Gates. Meanwhile, the very success of the Bradley Coalition's program of globalization was transforming the composition of the regional elites who constituted its membership. Everything was up for sale, and against the background of the super yen, Japanese capital, with Canadian investors in a close second place, suddenly became the major stakeholder in both downtown real estate and West Side movie studios. Editorial writers waxed hyperbolically about downtown LA's brilliant future as a command center of the Pacific Rim, while City Hall veterans wondered whether the city's new investors would become players or not. Old elites, meanwhile, were disappearing into the darkness of their San Marino and Montecito mausoleums. The social and politico-economic tectonic plates that underlay Los Angeles in 1989, in other words, had accumulated such impossible stress loads that you could almost hear the Hollywood Hills groaning. In a setting of increasing instability, only Tom Bradley seemed unchangeable, although his imposing gravitas, so reassuring in 1973, now seemed tired and remote. The mayor, in fact, was the silent prisoner of personal and political scandals, with the Times secretly holding the mortgage on his reputation. That was almost 20 years ago, and 20 years in the life of a metropolis as dynamic and unpredictable as Los Angeles is an entire historical epic. The years of suspense, of the conjecture, became the years of crisis, a conjugation of social and natural disaster almost unprecedented in modern American history, followed by years of recuperation and, we are told, sunshine and prosperity, with nary a noirish cloud on the horizon. After a municipal election, 2005, sadly devoid of new concepts, genuine passions, or substantive debate, Los Angeles at last has a mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, with a surname that resounds with the same accent as the majority of the population. The election of Villaraigosa, once a fiery trade union and civil liberties activist, should have been Los Angeles's LaGuardia moment, an opportunity to sweep City Hall clean of its old scheming cabals with their monomaniac obsession with gentrifying downtown at the expense of the city's blue-collar neighborhoods. Instead, Villaraigosa, like Tom Bradley in 1973-4, has become a non-threatening paragon of liberal accommodation to an unchanging elite agenda of pharaonic redevelopment projects. The former rebel from east of the river is now the jaded booster of a downtown renaissance that promotes super cathedrals, billionaire sports franchises, mega museums, yuppie lofts, and drunken Frank Gehry skyscrapers at the expense of social justice and affordable housing. He endorses an evil plan to expel the majority of the homeless from downtown in order to satisfy the greed of its landowners and gentrifiers. Villaraigosa, to be sure, owed his victory to the renascent power of the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor, and like his immediate predecessors, Richard Riordan and James Hahn, he is an earnest advocate of negotiation and incremental social progress, always within the parameters, of course, of what billionaire patrons like Eli Broad and Ron Burkle will allow. Westsiders, struggling to reconcile their obscene real estate equities with their residual social consciences, may find reassurance in the fact that Los Angeles continues to be governed by a smug coalition of corporate philanthropy and emasculated liberalism, with Villaraigosa as a Latin Bradley. But the blunted thrust of regime change has different, less happy implications for the rest of the city. If there was ever a time for fire in the belly and a radical politics of hope, it is now. Despite the mountain of gold that has been built downtown, Los Angeles remains vulnerable to the same explosive convergence of street anger, poverty, environmental crisis, and capital flight that made the early 1990s its worst crisis period since the early Depression. Los Angeles, of course, will not fall into the ocean, but it could resume the arc of decline that began in the early 1990s, slowly bleeding high-wage jobs, skilled workers, and fiscal resources. No great American city, the recent case of New Orleans aside, is so susceptible to downward mobility over the next generation. Why do I continue to be so pessimistic? Taking 1990 as a baseline, consider some of the most important structural trends and social changes of the generation that has followed the original conjecture of City of Quartz. 1. Regional immobility. In 1990, the Los Angeles County Transportation Commission's ambitious program of subway and light rail construction held the promise of increased mobility and reduced pollution. But in 2006, the imminent future is massive immobility and staggering congestion. Right now, locals pay a congestion tax, 93 hours per commuter per year lost in traffic delays. That is the highest in the United States, and twice as high as it was in 1982. In the worst scenario, it could double again in another decade. In the late Bradley years, it should now be clear, Los Angeles wrote the textbook on bad transport planning and even worse project management. The big-ticket projects of this era turned out to be costly fiascos. A Wilshire subway that didn't actually go down Wilshire Boulevard, or to the east side for that matter. A light rail to the airport that didn't actually go to LAX. And an Alameda corridor that was designed to take truck-hauled containers off the Long Beach freeway, but has failed to do so. Everyone loves to ride the subway, but few appreciate that it is underwritten by huge operating subsidies, almost $27 per passenger, that have been financed out of the pockets of bus riders. Between 1991 and 1997, as fares increased, the bus system lost 17% of its passenger volume, or 71 million trips, hardly a victory for mass transit. Overall, mass transit accounts for only 1 out of every 50 trips within the region. Likewise, both city and county have allowed politically powerful developers, like McGuire Thomas at Playa Vista or Newhall Ranch in the Santa Clara River Valley, to dump huge new volumes of traffic into the most congested nodes without any real mitigation. The projected 70,000-resident Tejon Ranch near Gorman, property formerly owned by the Chandler dynasty of the Los Angeles Times, will be even worse, the beginning of gridlock that someday may extend to Bakersfield in the San Joaquin Valley. Regionally, we are no closer to real planning or coordination of housing, jobs, and transportation than we were 50 years ago. There's much talk about smart growth and new urbanism, but with few exceptions, the regional norms are still dumb sprawl and senile suburbanism. Some politicians still invoke magic bullets and sci-fi fixies, like 200-mile-per-hour maglev trains, but Sacramento, which has recently siphoned off $2.5 billion in transportation funds to cover the budget deficit, is unable even to fill the potholes in our aging freeways. Southern California, as a result, is quickly turning into one huge, angry parking lot. Congestion will inevitably drive away more jobs and business, while also fueling an ugly neo-Malthusian politics, already audible on the AM dial, of blaming immigrants, whose environmental footprint is actually the smallest, for declining physical and social mobility. 2. Branchville. In the late 1980s, boosters of the now-forgotten LA 2000 scheme were claiming that LA would soon become the new command center of the California and Pacific Rim economies, the headquarters of the 21st century. The more incautious, perhaps they had smoked too much Jimson weed, even foresaw downtown as a second Manhattan, thanks to the Archimedean lever of Japanese investment. What a delirious vision. In fact, Japanese capital, suffering huge losses, couldn't bail out of downtown fast enough during the recession of the early 1990s. Financial consolidations in the wake of the savings and loan meltdown and bank deregulation left Los Angeles for the first time in its history without a single major locally headquartered bank. Indeed, apart from the odd oil company and some of the entertainment giants, Los Angeles is hardly a headquarters city at all. The final insult, of course, was Otis Chandler's decision, forced by the scandals and bloodbaths on Spring Street, to put a silver stake through his grandfather's heart and sell the Times, the flagship of local capitalism, to the Chicago Tribune empire. Thus, Los Angeles has entered the 21st century, as it did the 20th, largely as an economic colony of corporations and investors headquartered elsewhere. San Francisco, Charlotte, New York, Chicago, and Tokyo. A dozen or so billionaires, including Sumner Redstone, Kirk Kerkorian, Marvin Davis, and David Geffen, still receive mail at LA zip codes. But with the exception of Eli Broad, the new uber patron of downtown culture, their commitment to the region is unclear, even inscrutable. Rupert Murdoch is currently the biggest fish in the pond, but is he a local player? Hardly anyone knows. An elite, in the aggressive, almost militarized sense of Harry Chandler and his friends in the 1920s, hardly exists in Los Angeles anymore. Power and wealth, of course, remain massively concentrated, but there is a real sense of transience. Too many of the nouveau riche keep their bags packed, ready to bolt the city if it again catches fire or erupts in mayhem. 3. Manufacturing decline. By 1990, the Los Angeles region had lost most of the Fordist industries that once made it the nation's second-largest center of auto and tire manufacture. Of its 14 largest non-defense plants, 12, including Kaiser in Fontana and GM in Southgate, had been shut down and their machinery exported to China. Yet unlike anywhere else, the region actually gained manufacturing jobs in the 1980s through expanding aerospace payrolls and a light manufacturing boom, apparel, toys, furniture, centered around downtown. For a decade, Los Angeles surpassed Chicago with the largest manufacturing workforce in the country. But in the 1990s, Los Angeles County lost one-third of that compensatory industrial job base, as defense jobs were transferred to other regions, and light manufacturing was exported to border maquiladoras, or to China. In an era of national Republican hegemony, the heavily Democratic Los Angeles region has lost its former competitive advantage in Washington. Witness the blatant partisan politics in the early 1990s behind the transfer of thousands of Lockheed jobs from Burbank to Newt Gingrich's congressional district in Marietta, Georgia. The recent announcement that Boeing will be terminating the assembly of 717s in the former McDonnell Douglas plant in Long Beach marks the end of a historical era. For 50 years, Southern California's military-industrial economy was irrigated by an aqueduct of tax dollars from Washington. In some years, the net gain, via the inter-regional transfer of tax resources, was as much as $6 to $8 billion. Now the fiscal differential flows the other way. Los Angeles County, like Michigan or Ohio in the 1950s, now pays more in federal taxes than it receives in federal expenditures. Between 1983 and 1996, real per capita federal spending in Southern California fell by a whopping 14%. The decline of manufacturing jobs in the regional core, Los Angeles and Orange counties, moreover, has not been compensated for by small increases in the Inland Empire and San Diego counties. In addition, over the next few years, Los Angeles may lose half of its apparel employment to China. The burden of deindustrialization, of course, is most heavily felt in Los Angeles's new immigrant neighborhoods, where the garment industry has been a major employer. As manufacturing employment shrinks, an already precarious, low-wage workforce is further compressed into a limited spectrum of service sector jobs in restaurants, hotels, offices, theme parks, and private homes. This service-heavy economy, based upon a myriad of poorly capitalized small businesses, is especially vulnerable to fluctuations in economic weather. Indeed, both the rate of business formation and the rate of business failure remain higher than in most other metropolitan regions. This generates plenty of heartwarming stories about successful ethnic enterprise, but it also ensures an equally high rate of broken dreams and bankruptcy. Too many ethnic donut stores, nail parlors, tiendas, taco wagons, landscaping services, auto repair shops, and hairdressing studios survive only by dint of heroic feats of family self-exploitation. The employees of the micro-enterprise sector, moreover, tend to eke out survival at the barest minimum, caught in a gigantic, low-wage, largely off-the-books economic ghetto. 4. The new inequality. In 1988, as I was writing City of Quartz, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors threatened to shut down the ER at the California Medical Center. This was the beginning of what has become Los Angeles's permanent healthcare crisis, as county government has struggled unsuccessfully to maintain enough hospital beds to deal with the needs of 2.5 million uninsured residents. The county has been caught in a scissors between declining fiscal capacity, the legacy of Proposition 13 in 1978, and the refusal of so many local employers to provide health benefits to their workers. In South Central LA, 1 in 2 adults lacks any form of health insurance. Less than 1/3 of private employers in California as a whole, and even less in Los Angeles County, pay the full cost of their workers' health insurance premiums. As a result, in 1995, 1999, and again in 2002, the supervisors almost closed USC County General Hospital itself, a Chernobyl-like meltdown of healthcare only narrowly avoided by desperate measures at the last minute, including an emergency parcel tax and a grudging federal bailout. Although USC County is still open, 16 vital community health clinics have been closed, as has the ER at scandal-plagued Martin Luther King General in Willowbrook. The working poor in Los Angeles, in consequence, have only marginally better access to health care than they might possess in Mexico City or Rio de Janeiro. The county health crisis, still just a step away from system breakdown and catastrophe, is emblematic of the larger deficit of investment in a humane social safety net. Los Angeles, as it did in 1990, continues to house the poor in the street, an estimated 90,000 downtown and 236,000 homeless in the county, and the mentally ill in jails. The so-called civic recovery of the mid-1990s and the ensuing dot-com boom years did disappointingly little to reduce the massive poverty in the city. Indeed, according to the LA Coalition to End Hunger and Homelessness, the number of people living in high poverty in Los Angeles doubled during the 1990s. Los Angeles, according to United Way, remains the nation's poverty capital, with the largest number of poor of any metropolitan area. The city's family poverty rate is double the national average, and an amazing 59% of students in public schools qualify for free or reduced-price lunch programs. More broadly, the LA Riverside-Orange County area has the highest percentage of families in poverty and the lowest percentage of high school graduates of the nation's 14 largest metropolitan areas. Most of the poor, or at least poor parents, are in the labor force, and the persistence of such high levels of poverty through the last decade is evidence of labor markets that provide few footholds for occupational or income mobility. In part, this is the result of the educational shortfall in the labor force. An extraordinary 78% of adults in Los Angeles County are not college graduates, and 1.8 million are illiterate. Adult education, in other words, is an enormous, largely unmet public need, as well as the vital precondition to reskilling and economic mobility. Meanwhile, Los Angeles Unified School District continues its slow decline. 2/5 of current high school students do not graduate with their class. The Latino graduation rate is the worst, only 53%. But wages in California, over the last generation, have increased only for workers with a college degree. Those with high school or less have lost ground in the last decade. This may partially explain why Latino poverty in LA County soared from 22 to 35% during the early 1990s recession, then fell back to an uncomfortable plateau of 30%, where it has remained stuck ever since. The other side of poverty and vulnerability, of course, is inequality, and the Los Angeles metropolitan area has almost Latin American extremes of wealth and poverty. During the 1990s, real household incomes fell throughout much of Southern California, but the worst drop in the median income was in the city of Los Angeles, where it fell by 9.1%. At the same time, the percentage of households in poverty increased from 18 to 22%, while the percentage with an annual income of more than $100,000 increased from 9.7 to 15.7%. Almost 700,000 working adults in LA County have incomes below the poverty line, and 7 of the 10 fastest-growing occupations in the city including cashier and security guard, pay less than $25,000 per year.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?